What's up, everyone? This is Frank, and this is our Week 5 recap. I'm rocking the Huskies hat for this one. This is kind of my team of the week with their huge victory over Eastchester, pretty much putting them in the driver's seat for their number one seed on their side of the league. And we'll talk about that game when we get further down the line, but I want to give a shout out to them. They're my team of the week. I don't have equipment for everybody, so for the teams that I think are team of the week, I'll wear it. And if it's a team that I don't have equipment for, I'll just give them a shout out um, before we get started. But appreciate you guys as always. Let's start diving into it. I'll kind of give my analysis on the games, things that I saw, some very impressive performances, some shout outs you want to give out to, and some teams really needing to turn things around. But let's dive into it, and let's start off, and the game's going to be bouncing around. Let's start with Greeley at Clarkstown North in the A League, and Clarkstown North winning, getting its first victory of the season, winning 26-7. I talked about this on the preview show. Didn't surprise me that Clarkstown North won this game. Even though I picked Greeley, I feel like Clarkstown North was playing a little bit better. They were starting to compete. Now they're back at home. They have a bit of a size advantage on Greeley, and you know what? They did a really good job. They deserve a lot of credit. Turnovers were ugly for Greeley. They have at times turned the ball over that have really killed them. They had a couple of them in this game. Clarkstown North, their offense woke up, and Ryan Colopy had 2 rushing touchdowns. Aiden Pompey had a rushing touchdown. Jaden Biggio had a rushing touchdown. So multiple guys scoring for this offense. And Jack Kavanaugh, he made a couple big plays for them on the receiving end. And Sion Berry, he had those 2 INTs. Big playmaker. Came up big for them on the defensive side of the ball. They get their first victory going to 1-4, where it's really dropping to 2-4. And that was a league game. That was a big one. Let's talk about another very interesting game, and that's in the B League, and it's Putt Valley at Pearl River. And Putnam Valley, I thought this was so intriguing because Putnam Valley is a scrappy team, really strong defensive team, having to go to Pearl River, and Pearl River put together a couple very impressive games. And Pearl River wins this one 30-6, going to 4-1, and Putnam Valley dropping to 3-2. Let's start with Putnam Valley. It was a close game for a while. Defense played tough, but special teams was a huge factor in this one, and so was turnovers, and that's what really killed Putnam Valley. And Pearl River capitalized on that. Running back Meister, who's been really strong for them, he did have a kick return touchdown, which was a big play on special teams. 65 yards rushing, but he had a fumble loss. They tried a pass play at an INT. Quarterback Cunningham, 2 of 10 passing, and they've had some struggles passing the ball consistently this year. He also had an INT. Dobra, he was 2 of 4. He had an INT as well, so you can see 4 turnovers. That's what's really going to kill you. Now, Jashash, he was also very impressive defensively. He had 5 tackles, 2 tackles for loss. Caden Glenn was also pretty impactful on defense, on the defensive side of the ball, leading the way with 7 tackles, having a fumble recovery as well. But too many turnovers really hurt him. And Pearl River, I think, has really established itself as one of the upper echelon teams in B. I think it's constantly climbing that ladder, and they've been very impressive. 2 block punts. The defense has been very strong. Nick Espinal had 2 rushing touchdowns. He also had one of the block punts. Their quarterback in Wayland had 2 touchdowns, 1 passing, 1 rushing. Anthony Graziano had a receiving touchdown and an INT. Sean Davin, I've listened to this scorecard, right? So when making plays, had an INT, had a punt block, and a fumble recovery. So again, not scoring offensively, but making impact plays in special teams and defense. And I like that Pearl River, again, the always question is, can they continue to build up on that offensive line? They have put together some impressive defensive performances, scoring 30 points again. Hats off to them, going to 4-1. Putt Valley goes to 3-2. Let's go to another game. It is a double-A matchup. White Plains at Scarsdale, and Scarsdale winning 14-0, pushing them to 3-2. Now, this was a non-league game. White Plains goes to 0-5. White Plains defense played pretty well. I mean, they played tough. They didn't give up a lot of huge plays, but offensively couldn't get things going. And Scarsdale defensively responded. After last week giving up a couple of huge plays, they really were stout this week, coming back much stronger, and they get the victory here. Let's go to the next game. That's an A matchup. Pelham at Clarkstown South. And this was a league game, and Clarkstown South winning 51-14. Clarkstown South goes to 2-3. Pelham drops to 0-5. And Clarkstown South, focusing on them, I was tough on them last week because of they had 5 or 6 turnovers in the red zone. They couldn't capitalize on points. Well, the offense exploded this week, and they were back at home. Clarkstown South, their quarterback Holder, very efficient, right? And that was something that we wanted to see. 9 of 11, 192 yards, 3 touchdowns. Kevin Butler, who's been a stud for them all year, he was very impactful again. 79 yards rushing and a touchdown, 33 yards receiving and a touchdown. Also had 12 tackles. Mentakidis had 40 yards rushing and a touchdown. Oliveri had a rushing touchdown and a receiving touchdown, so right over 100 yards total for him. But I like you seeing multiple guys, even Jake Teal, who has also been making plays this year. He had 5 receptions, 78 yards, and a touchdown, and also an INT on defense. Defensively, they've been pretty good. Now, they did give up a couple touchdowns, but they were up big. Kyle Sparing was very active with 9 tackles and a sack. Kieran Walsh also had a couple tackles for loss and a sack. So, to me, this was a nice complete victory for South. And the big thing to me I was looking for is this offense. Can it continue to grow? The question is going to be against now the higher echelon teams. Can they continue to improve on the offensive side of the ball consistently and finish drives? But this was a nice victory for them at home. Let's talk about a double-A matchup, and that is New Rochelle at Arlington. And this was a rematch from last year's playoffs in the quarterfinals. And Arlington continues to roll. They won 41-21, moving to now 6-0, and New Rochelle dropping to 2-4. And let's start with New Rochelle. It was 27-14 at half, so a lot of big plays given up, but they were still relatively in it. The defense had an INT, but again, the defense, which has been kind of its most, they also had a kick return touchdown as well, but the defense, which has I thought been the most consistent part of this team at the start of the season, gave up over 400 yards of offense. So too much offense on that side. They did have some success. Again, they made a play on defense with an INT off of a screen. Dawson had a kick return touchdown, I believe it was. Their quarterback, James, had some success with off-tackle runs at the quarterback spot, but just giving up too many big plays, and it was in the run game and in the pass game, so on both sides of the ball. When I look at Arlington, this wasn't their cleanest. I know they win by 20, but 12 penalties, that's way too much. Got to clean that up. The quarterback was Signo, 10 of 19 passing, 238 yards, 2 touchdowns, had an INT, but also 99 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns again, and over 300 total yards. Continues that very impressive season. Davenport added 68 yards rushing and a touchdown. So you're talking about over 230 yards. You're talking about over 150 yards running the ball. This has been a very well-balanced attack. Luke Lavello was another guy who really stepped up. They've had multiple receivers who's made plays for them. I think 7 that have scored touchdowns, and he was one of them this week that made big plays for them. 3 receptions, 109 yards, and a touchdown. Also had an INT on defense. Joe McGann had a receiving touchdown this time around. Jason Finn continues to be very active defensively with 7 tackles. Jaden Tuttle had an INT. This defense forced 3 turnovers. And again, another complete performance from Arlington. It was a little rough early, right? They gave up a kick return touchdown, gave up an INT off a thing, and they had a lot of penalties, but get the victory, win by 20. Let's talk about an A matchup now. We have Brewster at Somers, and this is a big rivalry. These two teams have played each other so many times, but I was a bit shocked. Not that Somers won, and they ended up winning 31-13, but how dominant and fast they got off to. Somers is known to get off to some slow starts. Not in this game. They were down. Somers was up 21-0 in the first quarter, right? And let's just start with Brewster. Again, I was a bit surprised. Again, getting down. I know one of them was a special teams touchdown, but this team, they don't do well when they're behind by a lot because they're not comfortable throwing at a high volume, right? They like to run the football, control the clock, lower the possessions, and play good defense. And again, when you get down that fast, now you're doing things that you don't really want to do. And Dillon was 3 of 6 passing, that 13 yards. They had an INT. Fox 2 of 9 passing. Now, he did run the ball very well, had over 100 yards rushing and a touchdown. Barry, only 29 yards rushing and a touchdown. Brewster, they were behind so fast that they really had to claw their way out of it. And by that time, too much time is off the clock, so they couldn't move the ball that much. But, defensively, I was also a little surprised they gave up some big plays as well. So you have Brace had 9 tackles. Perello had 7 tackles. Lamaro has been a real impact player for them. He also had 7 tackles. Carlson had a sack. But, for me, you want to see this team bounce back. This was a very tough performance on both sides of the ball. Again, you got to get these league wins, right? And I know they were down. Somers is a loaded team, so these last couple weeks of the season are going to be huge for Brewster to try to make it into the playoffs. It starts for them. For Somers, though, Sullivan, I remember a couple weeks ago, I thought he was off to a slow. He wasn't as consistent, wasn't as accurate. But the last couple weeks, he has been super efficient. And this one, again, 14 of 17 passing, 138 yards, had a touchdown, did have an INT and also a rushing touchdown. Palazzolo didn't make huge impact plays as a receiver, but he had a kick return touchdown, which was a big spark for them. He's been a spark plug. Violante had a receiving touchdown. Kelly Rushed for 42 yards and a touchdown, also had 22 yards receiving. Iglesias is another guy who continues to make a very versatile player, plays on the offensive side of the ball. Nick Newman is another guy who's been kind of one of those leading tacklers for Somers. You've seen him now. I've mentioned him a couple weeks in a row. He's leading the way defensively with 5 tackles and a tackle for loss. And we know about Cole. He's been another impact player, had some nice couple plays in this one. Somers goes to 5-1, continuing to roll. Let's go to the next matchup, and this is a Hudson Valley Football League game, probably one of the most intriguing ones from this weekend. That was Peekskill at Tappan Zee, and Tappan Zee wins 14-6. Huge victory for Tappan Zee to go to 4-1. Peekskill drops to 3-2, and Peekskill, listen, they drove the ball at times, but they just couldn't capitalize. And at the end, they got down. It was like 4th and long. Couldn't capitalize on it near the red zone. They scored 30-plus points in 3 straight games, but not this time. Tappan Zee's defense was very good in this game. They really put Peekskill in a grind, having to make big plays on 3rd and 4th down, and they could not do it. So a lot of kudos to Tappan Zee. And their quarterback, Tommy Gavalian, had a rushing touchdown. Owen O'Hara, who's now a guy you've heard the last couple of weeks, has really been a huge player for them. He also had a touchdown as well. And that was just enough. Tappan Zee, Peekskill's defense has also been good. And Tappan Zee made enough plays offensively, but it's the defense that really shined. They go to 4-1. Let's talk about another big matchup, which is a AA, North Rockland at John J. East Fishkill. 2 teams where you're trying to see who is those next teams that can compete this year. And John J. East Fishkill win emphatically, 34-12. And when I watch this game, again, some of the ugliness of North Rockland, who's very talented. I like the guys over there coaching, but turnovers have been killer for this team, even in wins. But on the offense, 3 more turnovers. Again, how many turnovers I mentioned in the preview show over these last 2 to 3 games? They had 3 more now, 2 INTs and a fumble. Quarterback Hamilton was 5 of 13 for 59 yards and 2 INTs. Savor only 57 yards rushing. So when you get down big and they have to start passing more, that's not what North Rockland wants to do either. They want to run the ball. So he had 57 yards rushing, which wasn't a huge performance for him. Vasquez had 37 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns, also had a fumble. So defensively, which has been a very strong unit for them for most of the year, gave up 271 yards rushing. So the pass defense was strong, only 47 yards in the air, but way too many yards on the ground, really killing North Rockland with those turnovers. For John J. East Fishkill, let's start with obviously Feliciano, which wasn't his best passing day. He was 5 of 13 for 47 yards, but 79 yards rushing and a touchdown, and he also was super impactful defensively. This is a two-way player. He had 2 INTs, a fumble recovery, one of those INTs for a touchdown defensively. So even when offensively he wasn't clicking on all cylinders, he's still an impact player. He deserves a lot of credit. Rossi, though, on the other hand, he continues his hot streak, 121 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. He was so important. That offensive line running the ball these last couple weeks, which has been huge. Crouch also had 14 yards rushing and a touchdown, helped leading the way defensively. Berg had a sack. Impressive victory for John J. East Fishkill at home. Let's go to another interesting matchup that I saw. A lot of interesting ones kind of shining light here, and that's a B matchup, Lakeland at Ardsley. And Ardsley winning 22-6. Ardsley goes to 5-0. Lakeland goes to 3-3. And let's start with Lakeland. And again, back-to-back weeks of them starting off extremely slow. They started off slow versus Pleasantville, and now against Ardsley, down 22-0 at half, right? And then them clawing their way back. Offensively, they had 267 yards, right? And they held. I think they outgained Ardsley. In this game. So again, 267 yards, but 4 turnovers. And that's what was killer to them. 3 INTs, 1 fumble on special teams. Quarterback Leonard was 20 of 28, which again, pretty efficient numbers there. But 179 yards, a touchdown, 3 INTs. The turnovers were absolutely killer for Lakeland. Policastro had 70 yards rushing. Perry leading the way with receptions, and Gallagher had a touchdown reception. But again, their defense held Ardsley to 198 yards. So they less than 200 yards. Your offense, although didn't have a huge yardage either, because Ardsley's defense is pretty tough, but that's less than 200 yards allowed. 4 turnovers is the killer. Ardsley, 5-0 for the first time since 2018 and 2019. The offense, didn't come very easy this week. Quarterback Rendy, he had 2 rushing touchdowns and 2 picks on defense. Chenard had an INT for a touchdown, so pick 6. Cole Fiore had the fumble recovery on special teams. That was a huge play for them. Ben Silverman, Polsine, Cole Fiore, they all of them combined had 100 yards rushing. So again, not a lot of offense, but they made just enough plays, and the defense really shined. Trey Fiore also had a sack. It's this defense forcing turnovers, even though they were running the ball a little bit well on them, but they forced big-time turnovers, one of them for a touchdown. Ardsley winning at home in impressive fashion. They can really get after you on both the offensive line and defensive line, and these guys have been playmakers. So huge kudos to Ardsley going 5-0. Another B matchup, we have Hastings at Croton Harmon, and Croton Harmon winning 44-6, pushing them to 2-3, and Hastings dropping to 1-4. And I'll start with Croton Harmon. Multiple guys making plays for them. They've been so inconsistent on offense, but the offense exploded in this one. Now, Ben Reed, he had 84 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns, also had an INT. Jacob Jones, 7 of 8 passing, 164 yards, 2 touchdowns, also 77 yards rushing and a touchdown. He also plays linebacker and had 8 tackles, right? So huge player, very efficient on the offensive side, and then making those plays that I've seen him do all year, which is on the defensive side. Orlando Gomez had one of the receiving touchdowns there. This defense forced 3 INTs. Prince also had an INT. Nikic at the defensive line had a fumble recovery. So the defense forcing turnovers, which has been their scrap unit. They rebound and play a very strong game. Another B matchup, we have Nyack at Edgemont, and Nyack winning 33-7 in impressive fashion. Nyack goes back up to 3-2, and them running the football was big for them. Over 300 yards rushing in this game. Pierre had 156 and a touchdown. Claremont had 124 and a touchdown. You had Tylen Williams, who was 5 of 7, so very efficient. They don't ask him pass a lot, but 5 of 7 efficiently, 92 yards and a touchdown. Darcy Murray, he was their big target for them with 85 of those yards receiving and a touchdown. Persimi at 44 yards rushing, so add to that total. Ray Booten, we talked about him. He's an impact player on both sides, very fast. He had a great game defensively. 10 tackles and INT all over the place on defense, making plays. This was a dominant performance. Running the football, playing strong defense. Nyack gets a victory, and again, they're trying to build them way up as the season gets along. Are they one of those teams that can compete in B? They go to 3-2. Probably one of the big matchups, and why I'm wearing this hat right here, is the A matchup of Eastchester at Harrison, and Harrison winning 7-0. This was a defensive slugfest. Harrison goes up to 4-2. Eastchester drops to 4-2. But this was so important. This kind of puts Harrison now in the driver's seat to get that number 1 seed in their league. And this was a defensive battle and a tight battle. And let's start with the losing team in Eastchester. They were driving at the end. They had a penalty, pushed them back at 4th and 19. Then they had the incomplete pass. And this was about 5 minutes and 55 seconds of play, getting close to Harrison's end zone, which was a struggle to do all day long. But they had ability to stop them, and they couldn't. And Harrison ran down the clock. And so when I look at Eastchester, offensively, I thought this was going to be their hardest test. And they even said that after the game. And their quarterback, Schultz, 9 of 15 for 95 yards, also 46 yards rushing, but just not enough big plays. They couldn't convert on 3rd down enough, couldn't make the plays. When they started to move a little bit to finish drives, they could not do that. And so defense played strong. They stopped 4th down 4 times, 3 times in the first half. But in the end, when there was about 5 minutes, 55 seconds left and they needed another stop, they just couldn't do it. Harrison started to run the ball on them and drive out the clock. And when I look at Harrison, this was an impressive victory. Starting with defensively, they've had some strong games. Even the game against Somers, they also played them really tough defensively. They are hard to run on with that front 7. And if the secondary stays disciplined, and they did in this game, this is a complete defensive unit, probably one of the best, and it could be the best defense in the class. But they were strong. 2 shutouts in the last 3 weeks. They can really get after you. Their starters can really do it. Now, offensively, you win. They've won a couple games now over the last, 2 out of the last 3 weeks. One of them against Somers, they couldn't move the ball. But against South and against now Eastchester, you don't score 1 touchdown, right? So they do have to get things going offensively. Citro was 7 of 13, 129 yards, including one of those touchdowns to Krupe, who had 49 yards receiving a touchdown. Barcella was so impressive on that last drive, really had these hard-earned runs. He had 82 yards rushing by the end. But they got to get McLaughlin more involved and maybe even running the ball, doing some wildcat with him, putting him in the slot, making it a little bit easier throws to him. Maybe could help, but they do have to find things more consistently offensively. Defensively, they've been tremendous, but they need to run the ball, play action out of that more consistent. Let's go to another A matchup, and that is John Jay Cross River at Mahopac, and this was another league game, and Mahopac won 21-12. And let's start with John Jay Cross River. And this is kind of what I've said, throughout the league, sometimes when you're the underdog team and you get down early, teams tend to just give up. And I hate seeing that. I just want you to compete. Keep fighting to the end. You don't know what's going to happen. And Georgia Cross River, in my opinion, did a good example of battling. Right, that's what I call it. Because they're down 14-0 very early in this game. Easy to wave the white flag. Maypac's the favorite. You're on the road. But they didn't stop. And I thought the coaches did a good job defensively to kind of scheme up and force Maypac to go, when they're trying to pass the ball, to go away from Kearney. And they are undersized. It was difficult to stop the run consistently versus a guy like Koch and the size of the guys up front. But they were trying to force them away from Kearney and throwing to other people. And at times it worked. I mean, Maypac at times really couldn't finish drives either. So, but in the second half, they just started to run the ball. And that's where things started to leak for John Jay Cross River. And when you're the underdog, you got to continue to execute. And a big shout out to Harfige, the defensive back. He did a very good job on Kearney. Really helped lock him down. At times they were doubling, but at times they were put on an island, and he made some big plays. They tried to force it to him a couple times. Machado made some impressive throws as well. He had a couple passing touchdowns, but you can't, again, they had a wide open touchdown. It was a really strong throw. They dropped it. And then on 4th and goal, they had a chance there. The wide receiver had a great effort, but couldn't get a foot in bounds, which also ran incomplete. So you got to execute. They did have a turnover, but it didn't really kill them in this one. But they gave up that huge long pass to Koch, which, again, the defensive player lost the ball, got beat from behind, and that things can't happen. And then Koch had a nice long touchdown run towards the end. But those are, if you want to pull the upset, you have to execute on those plays, right? So I thought overall they played hard. I thought they schemed up pretty well, but you got to execute. Now for Maypac, Koch was huge, right? I had a feeling he was going to have a big game in this one just because of the size advantage that Maypac has. 30 carries, 170 yards, and a touchdown. Also flanked him out. Had a long touchdown reception, 2 receptions, 65 yards, and a touchdown. So over 230 yards for this young man. He was huge for them. Now, Maskell also had a receiving touchdown. But this defense at times gave up some big plays, but they made it difficult to run. And Varley was a big part of that. 8 tackles. He had 1.5 sacks and a forced fumble in this one. Let's go to the next game, AA matchup, RCK at Suffern, and really nice rebound from Suffern in this one, winning 27-7, going to 4-1. Brady Schnell was a big time player for them in this week. 75 yards rushing. He also had 61 yards receiving and a touchdown, so over 130 yards. He also was an impact player defensively with 8 tackles and a fumble recovery. Jeff Joseph, he had a strong game as well with 105 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's putting together a very, very strong season for them. Palumbo gets back on track. Offensively, passing the ball last week was very difficult. He had 2 passing touchdowns this week. Finn Mitchell had a touchdown reception. He's a guy who's made some plays. You've now heard him on. Defensive was last week. Offensively, he makes it this week. Let's go to another A matchup, and that is Fox Lane at Yorktown, and Yorktown winning 26-0. And let's start with Fox Lane. Again, they dropped to 2-3. They didn't score, and the 3 games they have lost, they have not scored. Right, so consistency on offense and finishing drives is a huge one for Fox Lane that they've at times really struggled. And Rotolo, he had over 100 yards, but on 37 carries. Right, so it was a real grind. Defensively, I thought they played relatively well. This was not Yorktown's best performance offensively, and the defense had an INT. They made some plays on Yorktown, which is a high-powered, high-octane offense, but special teams had a big blunder. Offensively, couldn't finish drives. And when you're, again, trying to pull the upset on the road, you got to execute on those plays if you're going to have a chance. And Fox Lane did not do that. Now, when I look at Yorktown, 2 block punts, a pick 6, defense really stole the show. In this one, Weissman also had an INT. Offensively, this was not their best performance. But again, with Yorktown, that impressed me. You still win 26-0, even when your offense did not play great. And Caden Gonzalez was 4 of 9, 63 yards and a touchdown, did have an INT. Costello was a big play guy for them with that touchdown reception. But Tyler Galante, now we've seen a pick 6. He's made some plays for this team over the last couple weeks. Matt Cicinelli had the block punt for a touchdown, 5 tackles and a sack. Chris Constantine, he had a rushing touchdown with 55 yards rushing, but this is a really important two-way player. He made some plays defensively as well. We know about Ryan Vogel, who might be, he's up there for Defensive Player of the Year. Another 10 tackles and a sack for him. Yorktown finding different ways to win is going to be extremely important for this team. They can continue to grow defensively just as strong as that offensive. That being able to do that on both sides of the ball, they could be continuing to grow and be one of the favorites. What's next is Rye at Byram Hills in a B matchup, and Rye winning 42-14, going to 4-2. Byram Hills drops to 2-3, and I'm going to focus in on Rye, and they were up 35-7 at half. Quarterback AJ Miller very efficient in this one, 10 of 12, 170 yards and a touchdown. They rushed as a team for 223 yards, and it's to continue that ability to run the football and then play action out of that, being efficient, that has made Rye look more and more impressive. And defensively, they've been most consistent. But Luliano, another 126 yards, 3 touchdowns. Jack Hesner, having him back is so huge. He was really good in this one with 6 receptions, 91 yards, and a touchdown. We have Will Marth, who has again been making plays for this defense. 5 tackles, had also an INT. Carson Miller had an INT. They started pulling guys towards the end, being up that big. But again, another impressive performance from Rye on the road. So let's remember that. So they get that huge victory. Now, probably going to my favorite league is the CD League. These teams are all even. They all, again, competing with each other. One team upsets this one team beats that one. They're very evenly matched, which is what I like. Just a lot of competition, and this one was one of them. Dobbs Ferry at Haldane, and Dobbs Ferry win 24-20. I think Dobbs Ferry was 8-0 in his last 8 games versus Haldane. This could have been the time, Haldane at home, but Dobbs Ferry comes on the road with a big victory, and it's their ability to run the ball. Jack Staub had 66 yards and a touchdown. Kevin Hartnett had 61 yards rushing and a touchdown. And then Holman, another guy who's really been impressive over the last couple of weeks, 68 yards and a touchdown as well. And defensively, Marty O'Leary is another guy who's made a lot of plays for this team, and he wasn't alone. Elon Messeri, and Shamaski, all making plays for this defense that did just enough. They were down. They come back and win this game against an impressive Haldane team. And for Haldane, offensively, they outgained them, right? But not an explosive game. They had 247 yards of total offense. Dobbs Ferry only 198. And so when you looked at the numbers going down this game, it was pretty even on majority of everything. But what hurt Haldane, 0-3 on 4th down. So they went for it a couple times on 4th down, did not get it. They were up 20-6, and they gave away the lead. And, that's the unfortunate part. Even though the defense under 200 total yards, right? So when you look at their quarterback, Van Tassel, 7 of 11, 65 yards, only 16 yards rushing, right? So not a huge strong performance this week from him, who's been so good this year. Gianchinta had another 172-yard game and also 2 touchdowns. He had 8 tackles. Brody Carlos had a pick 6 on defense. The defense, I thought, played well. It's just, unfortunately, couldn't close the deal, and they started clawing their way back, and fortunately for Dobbs Ferry, unfortunately for Haldane, they get their first loss. A double A matchup, Yonkers Brave at Mount Vernon. Mount Vernon winning 32-22. Yonkers Brave goes to 0-6. Mount Vernon goes to 2-3. And this was a nice offensive performance from both teams. Yonkers Brave, you can see, they've had years where they've really struggled offensively. And this year, I've seen nice signs of them on offense, but the defense gives up too many big plays. And this was another case of that. Mount Vernon, big and strong, making big plays on offense, defensively doing just enough because they gave up some big plays as well, but Mount Vernon gets the victory here. Let's continue going, guys. Another good game, Hudson Valley Football League game, Spring Valley at Poughkeepsie, and Spring Valley winning 6-0 to go to 5-0. Poughkeepsie drops to 1-5, and Spring Valley's defense has been really good this year in this Hudson Valley Football League. They've had multiple shutouts. They have made it very difficult for teams to move the ball consistently. They put a lot of pressure on you. Offensively is the thing where can they be consistent at, right? So they only scored 6 points this week. The offense the week before put up a bunch of points. So which offense are we going to see? Poughkeepsie's defense, I thought, played really strong. Again, limiting the Spring Valley to 6 points. They didn't give up a lot of huge plays, but Spring Valley's defense proved too much for Poughkeepsie. They couldn't move the ball consistently at home. Spring Valley gets the victory. Now let's talk about Rhinebeck at Albertus Magnus in the B League. Rhinebeck winning again, 21-12. This was a non-league game, but when you look at Rhinebeck, 5 straight wins, and this is now a couple different guys making plays. We know about their quarterback in Merkel, who had a touchdown pass in this one, but Kyle Snow had a touchdown run. Spiceman had the touchdown reception from Merkel. Sal DeVeri had a touchdown. So multiple guys making plays. It's not just all on Merkel to make these kind of plays. And defensively, again, the defense had a strong performance in this one. So limiting the team to 12 points. I know Albertus Magnus offensively hasn't been the most consistent, but offense makes some nice plays for them. Defense holds it off enough, getting 5 straight victories for Rhinebeck. A huge B matchup here, Pleasantville and Nanuet. We've seen these two teams battle it out for multiple years in a row, and Pleasantville really dominated. They won 33-7 in this one, and a bit of a surprise for me. Pleasantville, not that they didn't win because I chose them to win, but they were up 20-7 at half, and it really didn't even feel that close. I mean, they really controlled this game, which was a bit surprising, especially offensively. They rushed for 275 yards. I mean, that's crazy to me. They also passed for over 200 yards. So you're close to 500 yards of offense on a Nanuet defense that has been very impressive this year. So, again, dominant performance. A bit surprised. Nanuet just didn't, they were just getting ran on. I mean, it's very surprising for me. I know Nanuet at times have given up some big plays in the passing game, but this was a surprise performance from Nanuet's defense. I'm anticipating them to respawn very, very quickly because it's unlike them. And when they get down, right, Nanuet also is a team like to be ahead of the chains, control the game, play good defense, and run the football. And they didn't have that chance being down that early. When you look at Pleasantville, Aiden Picard had a very strong game in this one. 13-17, 212 yards, 3 touchdowns. Did have a 1 INT, but I thought he was very efficient with the ball. And very smart with the ball. We know about Daniel Picard, right? He had 142 yards rushing and a touchdown, and also 139 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns. They moved him around. He was at one time was one-on-one, beating his defensive back deep. It looked like an easy touchdown. Also being in the slot, running some bubbles with him, getting him out on the edge. He really had his fingerprints all over this game. But he wasn't alone. Eric Coleman had a nice touchdown. Horrigan, again, when you talk about Nanuet defending the run, they dominated. Oregon leading the way with 11 tackles. McPhee, another one with 9 tackles, had a really strong game. Michael Hudzinski had an INT, and the Hudzinski brothers combined had 16 tackles. So another complete performance from Pleasantville. And this offensive and defensive line continues to show out. They go to 5-0. So go to Hudson Valley Football League. Portchester at Ramapo, and Portchester winning on the road 28-26 to go to 1-4, and dropping Ramapo to 1-4. And this was a nice bounce back victory for Portchester. I'm sorry, I think that was Portchester's second win. Excuse me. But this was a nice bounce back game for Portchester. They've been losing games pretty badly the last couple of weeks. They haven't been able to score, and the offense really exploded this time. Now, defensively, they still gave up some big plays, but offensively, waking up and making big plays for them is huge. So this was a really good bounce back game for Portchester. Ramapo had a lot of speed there, but defensively, they just did way too much, right? So that hurt them, and Portchester gets the nice victory. Another really good game is a double-A matchup, Mamaroneck at Carmel. I was able to watch this one in kind of the rain, ugly weather game, which is that Carmel kind of game. And I'll start with Mamaroneck. They were up 6-3 at half, right? And that touchdown was it was off a blocked field goal at the end of the half for a touchdown that Micah Berry-Thous picked up and ran it all the way. Offensively, was a real struggle. I mean, let's just call it what it is. They couldn't really run the ball. And in this kind of weather where it was really ugly, passing the ball was a tough option. Now, Kieran Jacobson, he was 6 of 10 for 73 yards. Trying to get the ball, out on some screens, which worked at times, and some go routes, because you have to be able to throw the ball on Carmel. You have to keep them honest because they like to bring force defenders or edge players close to the tackle box to help defend against the run, and they're daring you to throw on them, and you got to be able to do it. But in this kind of weather, it was like almost a perfect extra defender for them. Mamaroneck really struggled offensively. Defensively, they battled. I thought they really did battle for most of it. They gave up a lot. We're about to get to Carmel. Gave up a lot of rush yards, but they was a very bend but don't break, and they forced a couple turnovers. Carmel had some penalties, and they were battling and staying in this game, but offensively, they just didn't do enough, and eventually, defensively, they broke down on some big ones for Mamaroneck. But let's talk about Carmel. And, this is now 3 straight wins for them. And offensively, 465 yards on offense, and 458 of them running the football. They had 7 yards passing. I think they passed the ball maybe 4 or 5 times. And yes, there were penalties, and there were some turnovers, and some 4th down stops, and 4th down conversions that they didn't have offensively. But I got to give them a lot of credit. this was that kind of game where the team that was more physical and could run the ball more consistently was going to win it in this ugly weather game. And that has been Carmel. That has been their MO so far this season. And their offensive line coach, which I think is probably one of the best in Section 1, and Jeff Hughes, he deserves a lot of credit. I mean, he's been the O-line coach, I think, the last 2 years. Um, and this offensive line has dominated people. I know in the state title game, they also had a dominant offensive line as well. But boy, these last 2 years, when you don't have the state title type offensive lineman, you had a really good offensive line last year. Lost a couple guys like Bolin, and then coming back this year, and they were mauling dudes. I mean, absolutely moving dudes. And it's a lot of credit to those kids up front, some of which I coached, which were very impressive last year. But there were some new guys who had to step in for some of those seniors leaving, and they moved the sled. I mean, that's really what they're moving the sled. And you get 458 yards rushing, and I could say it's all one guy, which one guy was the dominant force, which was Werlu, 311 yards rushing. I mean, that's Madden numbers. Those are numbers that you put on a video game and a controller on rookie mode, and you get those kind of numbers. So that's ridiculous. He runs with such power and balance. He ran through a lot of arm tackles, just bouncing off dudes. There's one time it was like second and 25, and he had a 60-yard run, and it's just running downhill behind this big offensive line, moving dudes, and it was a dominant effort. Venables, another guy, 95 yards and a touchdown. So it wasn't just one guy, even though one guy was really good in Werlu, but multiple guys can run the football in this offense. They're not relying on the pass a lot right now, and now we look at defensively, and they're not doing a lot of crazy things. They'll bring a lot of pressure off the edges. They'll bring some pressure up the middle at times, but it's just relying on their size and strength and those edge defenders close to the line of scrimmage to stop the run, create some negative plays, and then bring the heat. And they're daring these teams to try to, again, either out scheme it or get the ball out of your hand quickly and make plays in space. And teams have not been able to do it the last couple of weeks. And I give them a lot of credit. 83 yards allowed, 4 sacks. And guys like Risley, Forrester, Abel at times in that secondary, Santiago. I mean, these guys just really get after it. And whenever you see the ball, and one thing that's very impressed to me, and I know because I'm just watching this game and seeing Carmel, they just swarm to the football. And that's an impressive feat. So kudos to them. They go to 4-1. And I think it was 17-6, right? So, yeah, a lot of kudos to Carmel. Let's go to the next game. B matchup. Briarcliff Hamilton football program at Sleepy Hollow. Sleepy Hollow winning 31-13, getting their second win of the season. Briarcliff Hamilton football dropping to 1-4. And this was a running game. Again, I mentioned running in the last game. Evan Bowen, another guy, what a tremendous performance he had this week. 287 yards and 4 touchdowns. He has been the bell cow for this team. And behind the size, with a clear size advantage for Sleepy Hollow, they ran the ball often, and he made some big-time plays for them. Also, the field goal unit, too. A big shout-out to Adrian Rodriguez, a 32-yarder and a 47-yard field goal for them. But Sleepy Hollow at home gets back on track. Play also pretty well defensively. Shout-out to them. Another great game to me, again, in the CD game, is Valhalla at Tuckahoe. And Tuckahoe winning 34-24. Valhalla came off that huge victory last week. They have to go on the road to Tuckahoe. And Tuckahoe is a tough football team. To win in Tuckahoe is difficult. And Tuckahoe bounced back and won. Really impressive performance. Let's start with Valhalla. The big difference in this one was turnovers. They had 3 turnovers. They did have a blocked field goal that they returned for a touchdown, but those turnovers were huge. And again, defending the pass also was a struggle in this game. And quarterback O'Neal had a nice rushing touchdown, also made some nice throws. The guy like Tyler Ratty, who's made some plays. Rob Foysett continues to have a strong game now. Not a huge performance with 76 yards rushing, but he had 2 touchdowns. He also returned that blocked field goal for a touchdown, so 3 touchdowns total. He's been so important for this team in each phase of the game. Luke Foysett with also 7 tackles in this one, but the inability to stop the passing game and big pass plays is what hurt Valhalla in the end with those turnovers. And let's go to Tuckahoe now. I know I've been screwing up their quarterback's name, and I apologize to the family, but Colachico, okay? And he has had a great season, and it continued in this one, right? 15-25, 266 yards, 3 touchdowns, 175 yards rushing, and 2 more touchdowns on the ground. Another 5-touchdown performance from him, and he has just been absolutely tremendous. And he's going to be definitely in the running for Offensive Player of the Year. And he's just been so good. And he has a trio of weapons passing the ball that has been tremendous. And the guy who's really stepped up this week, Connor Banky, 158 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns on 6 receptions. Also had 5 tackles. He's a big play for them defensively. He was huge for them. Snyder, 6 receptions, 65 yards, a touchdown, also 2 INTs. He was huge on the defensive side, really helped change things. Patucco has a huge bounce back game at home, winning this one. The CD class has been so competitive, which I have loved. So shout out to Tucko. On the other C side, though, unfortunately, Woodlands had to forfeit their game to Westlake, so Westlake goes to 4-0. Woodlands drops to 0-4. And the last 2 games, let's do the AA game. Probably one of the bigger surprises, again, to me, Yonkers Force at Ossining. And Ossining dominated 35-0. And, I honestly couldn't believe it when I saw what the score, Yonkers Force, who has a pretty high-powered offense, getting shut out was pretty wild. That to me, and I know Yonkers Force at times has struggled against the run, and that's where really Ossining really hurt them. And LaFaro is another very tough runner. He had 225 yards rushing, and Gio Pierre had another 96 yards rushing. So over 300 yards rushing for Ossining, and Yonkers Force gets shut out, and Danny Short with 8 tackles and an INT for a touchdown. So dominant performance for Ossining at home in a league game. So this was a huge game, and Ossining gets the victory. And finally, to wrap it all off in a B League, Hen Hud at Irvington. Hen Hud getting their first victory of the year, so congratulations to their new coach, winning 49-14. And again, this was a performance. I've seen Hen Hud, make some plays throughout the last couple of weeks that you've seen some improvement, and now they get the victory. So really good one here. Andrade had 127 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground, also 5 tackles. He had 4 different players score here. Bowd, we've seen him start making some plays. Only has to throw 2 times. He was 2 for 2, though, for a touchdown, 44 yards rushing and a touchdown. Parkey's made some plays receiving, also had an INT. He had a receiving touchdown over 100 yards. On the ground, over 100 yards and a touchdown, and also had an INT. Nico Bazalga, he was another guy who had that receiving touchdown and making plays. And then Kyle Pesky, also 6 tackles for him. So a bunch of guys on Hen Hud contributing to their first victory. Definitely has to feel good on the road. But then you could see them starting to build something here. So nice victory for Hen Hud going to 1-4. All right, guys, that was it. I know it was a long one. A lot of football to talk about. Love talking it as always. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you all very soon.